on my recording. Okay, recording is on. The date is, what's this month? This is November 28th, 2018, the class meeting after Thanksgiving. This is the regularly scheduled class of ITSE 2347 at Collin College, Advanced Database Programming. And let's see, where are we going in the future? In the future, we have one more scheduled class meeting, and then we have the scheduled time for our final, which will be, in other words, we've got the next 2 Wednesdays. We have the classroom at 6 o'clock to whenever. I do not intend to cover any new material. So I'm not going to make any new assignments other than the statistics. I have opened the assignment where you can turn in your forms. That was more just the experience of seeing the forms happen. It's very, very difficult to build a completely bulletproof form. I never could. And the people who do, you have generally teams of people that work on those things, and they spend a great deal of time on them. Let's see, what else was I thinking? In the statistics program, it has been pointed out to me that I don't recall when I said to do the triggers. I want to go back and look at the triggers. Visual Basic. Let's see, part 2. The triggers were, I believe, in part 2. Yes, okay. Okay, I said there will be 3 triggers. One for each of the game tables that execute instead of insert. And then I said also trigger, insert, and update. I'm going to delete that. Because triggering these guys is really easy. Okay, RPS trigger delete. Instead of delete, just throw an error. Very easy. You don't really have to do anything. The problem with it is if we have an update trigger, it will block us from updating the players table in the count. Now I could get in there and I could say if you try to update anything else, throw an error. So I could let you update one row or one column, excuse me. So if you just updated the count, I could let you get away with that. I don't think it's really showing us anything. I'm going to edit this. Oh, what's that now? I didn't mean to say insert. I meant to say delete and update, which are easy. Well, I'm telling you there'll be 3 triggers, and instead of insert, now the insert trigger is important because we're going to be inserting. Basically, our database is an insert-only database, as lots of them are. Once a row is inserted, it's never deleted, it's never updated. Okay, so it's just accumulating data. Right, I'd say. You do not have to do the delete and the update triggers. Shame on you, sir. Yeah. You may leave it in there. Okay.
very fragile.
Okay, no, it's okay. If you want, if you did them, that's fine. Yeah.
So, Dr. Smith, you said there was a way to restrict to like one particular field.
Yes, there is. Basically, it's just done in the code, and you say update, and you look at the if they're updating the row count or the game count, you let that proceed. If they're trying to update anything else, you kill it. Mm-hmm. Right. I don't know that it's worth doing, but you can. The problem with the trigger is it gets everybody. I mean, even the sysadmin can't get around a trigger without disabling it. So that's going to stop everybody, everything. The grant does not stop the people who have the right to use the table granting or taking. If it's sysadmin and the DBO, anybody logged in as DBO or sysadmin can update the table, can do anything with it, whether I've granted them update privileges or not. Triggers will stop everybody. Okay. And everybody wave our arms. What's going on here? Yeah. You guys are too quiet. Okay. I does not find that this disable trigger all on RPSDB. I did not find, anybody get that working? Disable trigger all? I didn't get it working either.
Oh no, and I was Googling it. It said something about that wasn't a good idea because it could interfere with replication.
Okay. Okay. So I guess they've. I guess that's something that's been depreciated. So you have to disable each trigger. Okay. 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 Well, you think we're programming in C here? This is SQL. SQL, you love it when it gets 1,500 lines, 2,000 lines that you could have written in C and 100 lines. It takes 2,000 lines to write in SQL. That is true. Okay. So it's okay. It's okay if you don't do those simple ones. I want you to do, there will be 3 triggers. Okay, so this part, put this in italics, underline it. 3 triggers. The others optional. 3 insert triggers instead of insert. That's what's required there. And when you turn this in, add something here, please. I need at least the table creation. I can't do anything if all I have is the triggers. I don't keep your code from the last time I graded it. I know I have it in there someplace, but I don't. I'd rather not go chasing it and having to go back through a old assignment. Yeah, it likely has. So include, I don't know that you have to include all the views and the functions and the procedures. I don't really need the procedures to test the triggers, but I do need the table creation. The triggers work. Lots of times I create the triggers when I create the tables. I look at them as kind of table constraints on steroids. Okay, what else? So let's see, we'll meet next week at the usual time. We'll do mostly a lab like we're going to do now. I'm going to go through stuff and be helping people get their code running. Next week will be about the same. Then on the 12th, was it? Yeah, the 12th. I will be here on the 12th at 6 o'clock. If nobody shows up, I'm not going to hang around for a whole long time, but I'll be here. Because I'm supposed to be. Well, technically, I'm not allowed to tell you that you don't have to come. But. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, we're supposed to. I've got a lot of leeway on whether we do a test or a project. In theory, they're supposed to, because the last day of class is seat time, and it is counted as one of the class days in the legal definition of the class. We have to have some deliverable that happens on that day. So turn in your last assignment on that day. Whether turn in something. Oh well, whatever. So anyway, that's where we're going to go with that. And let's see, have I? I'm letting you do zip files if you want to do them on these. I'm not a big fan of zip files most of the time. If it's just a one file SQL, it's just actually you can many times zip the file and it'll get bigger. If you zip a very small file, very small text file, it'll get bigger when you get really large stuff. So. Any questions on anything? I'm ready to start work around. Mary had a question on hers, and anybody else, is yours running? They're having a problem with the games trigger. Okay. Well, we'll see if we can retaliate. Okay. I'm going to kind of come around. I'm not going to spend a whole hour with anybody. I'll be around, okay? Are we done this class? I'm not going to present any new material. The statistics, okay. Question is, what is the objective of statistics? I got something. Well, the statistics can change, so I should right. Can measure something before and after to see the final. Let me. The view and the table have to be synchronized. View and the table, you're making the same. Like all the tables, you should see the same. Let me bring mine up and get it because I've. The table we create. The new table. Okay. You initialize it with 0, 0, 0 number of players, 0 number of games. And then you build it. Yeah, just a moment, and let me bring that up. That's not what I thought we using the existing table like a. We are. Yeah. We are. We are making a very small table. That's on my desktop. Desktop here. Okay, creating my tables, execute, close.
So if I create a view like a 1 second and I query the
Create
table,
my
in 2
sequences.
seconds, so I see the input. Something like that. Basically, you're writing triggers.
Create my functions.
Insert a player, update this. You insert a game and update the table. So you keep your table up to date every time you insert a game.
It's like more real time.
So the view is there for the attention. The view will always be right because table should be right. Just select start. I thought the view is just the existing table, so that's what the view is, right? It's real time.
Yeah, just now. Okay, let me find my code that created that.
We measure it. We shall measure some time, right? So statistics.
Just
So we can measure something like a 0.1 second and it's a 0.2, so we see that's what
there'll be quite a bit of difference between them. Right. There will be a.
I couldn't really tell the difference in execution time.
table got to be updated because you insert it, right? So what we take what
Create.
Statistics showing that you can modify your trigger table every time something changes.
Well, crap.
When you insert a player, okay. You're putting a player in the player's table. Yeah. Now you have so now you've got a player with 0 game. Yep. And then when you create a game, you're inserting a game into the games table, but now you have to update this other. Now you have a player with a game. But each time you create a game, 2 players, 1 game is equal. I don't see the point of
Okay.
object assignment. That's what I follow what you're saying, but I just try to figure out what you try to tell me. I thought the statistic is because we have a high volume of the data. So before there's something we should measure before and after. So the statistics table is count how many players have X number of games. Yes, now I have it. Okay, I got it. So they have the 100. They have a one player have a 3 game, right? Then the 2 player have a 2 game, and they have a 100 player have a 1 game and a 0 game. Okay, I got this triangle hierarchy. Okay, so what is the next? The table keeps track of that. So he gave us the view. See what it's supposed to look like.
You're like me. I can't find my stuff sometimes.
Yeah, I brought it over here.
Yes.
Where's my statistics?
By using trigger? Yes. So in your insert player trigger, and so now you're not only just inserting player, now you're making changes to. Okay. So I need to
And
create
the
a new trigger.
transaction, like
And
with commit.
they have a new table. If I create a new trigger here, also my
Existing one.
Okay, to add a code to insert to the new table called statistical table. Yes. Okay, so now you're inserting a player. Insert the player.
A brand new player has 0 games. You haven't put them in a game yet.
Okay. the player with zero game.
Because
Okay,
you have,
even though I don't create a new table, I still can see the player with zero game if I insert the new player.
Sure.
That's currently working. So what's the point we add a new table to compare something? What is the benefit for the new table?
Okay.
For this one? Because
This
we
is
add
the
a new
one.
table,
Here's the game.
we know how to,
Here's the game I'm trying. Here's the one I'm trying to get to right here, but I don't have that showing up on my screen. Let me go through this. Well, it should be in there.
The new table name statistic RBS underscore statistic, and they have two columns. This output table. Yeah, this applies. And original how to create this 10,000 row of table, new table. How do we do that? How we create this? How we
that's a pre-populated script that we have.
how we create the 10,000 row.
Okay, here it is. I finally got it here. Okay, the first piece of this generates a whole bunch of rows. Now, the reason we're generating reason we stopped at about 28,000 is there's a limit to how many I can have in SQL Express, the free version. If I want to go pay thousands of dollars, I can get one that do more. But essentially, the free version will cut us off around 33,000 or so. So I'm staying well under the limit, right? It throws random rows into the RPS tables. It uses the procedures it should run, standardize the interface. If it doesn't run, we're going to make it run, okay? And so I might need to disable some triggers here, but basically I just use him. And here I'm going to have a for loop that runs a nested for loop, 3 for loops, nested deep, nested 26 deep. The first one runs A through Z. The second one runs A through Z. The third one runs A through Z. That's 26 to the third power. That number 17,576 is 26 to the third power. I've generated every possible name that I can generate in 3 letters.
The beginning of the file describe the objective of this project, or
The objective of the first part of it is to generate a whole bunch of rows in the table.
okay, done. All right.
All right, and I'm going to do that it's actually very simple code. I start at
Yeah, understand.
Stop.
Where they show the fifth table. That's what I have.
Okay, so well, basically it's for loop, okay? But in SQL T-SQL, I have to do the for loop, meaning I have to set the, okay, good.
I just want to know where you show the fifth new table.
You didn't show us.
I haven't shown it yet. I'm
You
not
did show us.
I'm not
You
gonna
just told us we had to do it.
Okay,
I'm not gonna give you that.
so
Let me pull.
let's say
Let me start my Word. I've got it define logic for statistics right here. I believe I sent you that. And it is a Word document.
yeah, that's what I'm reading right now since the beginning, and I read.
Okay.
Times I did not figure out
Okay, let me go through that because that's where you find out about this, but I didn't give it to you. Now,
I don't need it. I just-
okay, just let me finish, please. The idea is that instead of, okay, let me push down to the end of this. I'm still generating this. And then I look at some stuff. How many games do I have? I should have somewhere around 10,000. I should have somewhere around 10,000 rounds, but we're not even using the rounds. Okay, now here's where we get to the view. I create a view here. Okay, as.
This is the code.
This is the code that creates the, I'm going to show you the code, I give you the code to create the view.
Understand, you did it last time, right?
Right,
Yeah. So
Okay.
let's say you just say you're going to show us the Word document.
okay, now you're going to create, you're going to do this without the view. What happens with a view? A view executes each time. Each time I say, okay, so when I create it, now the view is created. Every time I do this, execute. I don't know why I'm not getting anything. Oh, I haven't run it yet. Execute. I haven't changed that table yet. I need to do a little bit of work on this.
You don't need to show us the code. You already did.
Well, okay.
You just show us what is the objective for the last.
Okay, the objective is you're going to do this without a view. You're going to make that view be a table instead.
And what's the benefit?
The benefit is because the view is very expensive.
Okay, costly, high cost.
High cost. Every time I select from the view, I have to go out and go through all of those records. Now, if I make a table, RPS statistics, and I keep that table up to date, then I can, now it's very cheap to go read from. Okay. So that's the objective, is to we have a view, and we find that if I were to run that view, it would take about 1.5 seconds. If I select from the table, I can do that in about 0.1 seconds. So it's 15 times faster, probably more. And so the idea being that if we're doing that a lot, and I use the idea from that, remember from the APDB, where I went through and we looked at the invoice line items. And the invoice line items, each one has an invoice amount. And then over in the invoices table, we have the total of those amounts.
But I got it.
Okay. Well, it's not a big table. Okay.
What is the next step?
Okay.
How to get it there?
Step one. Create the RPS statistics table. It has 2 integers in it. You do not need to worry about making it accessible to the public. You create the RPS statistics table with 2 integers. I call my 2 integers num games and num players. You may call yours as you please. The primary key is the number of games. In the init routine, to start, wipe out all the data and insert the row 0, 0 into that table to start.
Okay.
All right. Now, questions? What? We're inserting 1 row. I need to have 1 dummy row in there to start from. And so I could insert 50 of them. Right. 0 players have 0 games, and then 1 player has 0 games, 2 players have 0 games, 3 players have 0 games. That doesn't make any sense. 0 players have 1 game, 0 players have 2 games, 0 players have 3 games. That makes sense. So, but where do I stop? So I only need 1 row in there. So 0 players, once you insert a player, he has 0 games when he first comes in. That's the row he goes into. I'm calling these buckets. Okay. So 0 players have 0 games to start. Step 2. Are you watching? Please watch. Add an integer field to RPS players. Default it to 0. Where did I do that? I thought I did it. I create table. Okay, here's where I created RPS statistics. Primary key it's just 2 numbers. RPS players, P game count. I thought I ran this thing. Now this should run. Execute. Where, how many times, how long? 5 seconds. There, after 7 seconds. Okay. How many games do I have? Please, Chen, please.
So the first table has 2 columns. Do we have any constraint for each column? Or?
If you look at what I wrote, there's one constraint, a primary key.
Okay, so is this in which file?
This is it's just a table. It's a table, and I created it, and this is in my create games. So my create tables. So it's just a table. I'm creating a table called RPS statistics. It has a constraint.
I don't see any table with constriction in the Word document. So which means there's no restriction.
There's no restrictions that I've put on it. I've got an integer and a big int. If I were allowed to have unsigned int, I would, but I don't have that in SQL Server.
Okay.
So they're going to be positive. Okay. I made this one be big int because it could be big. I don't know how many players I'm going to have. So the number of games is going to be probably small. And then this one could get big. So I made him big int. He's not gonna, the 30,000 is nothing. Okay. So create now. One more thing. Please look at the screen. When over there in RPS players, I need to add one more field to RPS players. The game count. How many games will I be in? I don't know whether that should be a tiny int or not. Remember, a tiny int has an upper bound of 255. It'll be okay for this one, but it might need to be an integer. If I get real popular and have lots of games going. So that I could run out of that. Okay. I put the default of 0. Okay. Questions? I'm going to go back to this dialog here. So add that field with me. Now, I'm going to go to the insert trigger of RPS player. Here's where some of it works. I've got the insert player and of RPS players, the insert trigger of RPS games. Okay. The insert trigger of RPS players is fairly easy. In the insert trigger, increment the number of players in RPS statistics where the number of games is equal to 0. Now remember, we put that one row there. I don't have to ask if it's there. It's going to be there. That makes my life a lot easier by putting in that one dummy row to start with. It's just, I'm going to have it. I'm going to use it. So I might as well put it in there. It doesn't hurt anything being sitting there 0, 0. Now, what happens when I insert my first player? I have one player that has 0 games. When I insert another player, I have 2 players with 0 games. After I've inserted 17,500 and whatever it is players, I have that many players with 0 games. Then I start inserting games, and those numbers change. But where do they go first? They go in that 0 bucket. Player comes in, he goes in the 0 bucket. He doesn't have any games. Go ahead. You mean here in the transaction?
Yes.
I'm inserting into the 0 row. That's where it's going, because when I insert a player, the player will never come in with multiple games. He's always going to come in with 0 games. So that makes my life nice and easy in this one. I know right where the player goes. I know right which row in the statistics table to update.
Why do you lock the statistics table when you're inserting a player?
I lock because all of that has to go together. You know, if we were talking about money, if I fail to insert into the statistics table for any reason, I cannot accept the player. I don't want it ever to be wrong. I'm willing to accept it, none of it happening, but I don't want half of it to happen. Right. What would happen if I inserted the player and somebody else? This would be a record. You find these in what we call the branch log in banks. Everything that happens at the branch gets written to this log. It is a pain in the neck because everybody, every teller, everybody that's updating anything always updates this one. It makes a big little keyhole. Everything has to go through. So the statistics table, all of the players that are, everybody who's playing this game has to update this statistics table.
I think I can see kind of the rationale for locking when the players get into a game. But what I'm having trouble understanding the benefit of blocking when they're just getting put in.
When they're getting put in, I'm ensuring that they either get put into both tables or they get put into neither table.
But when we
Right.
either all happens or none.
That's what I mean, a transaction, right? So it would be a transaction.
So if you have a transaction, then why do you need to lock that row 0?
Because just because I'm in a transaction doesn't mean that somebody else can't come along there and lock it. If I lock it before I go into, if I lock it either at the beginning of the transaction or before, it's a little bit like if you're, don't you love it when janitors do this? When they go to clean the restrooms, what do? They go lock all of the restrooms in the building, closed for cleaning. And then they come through and clean each, so they make sure they have it, so they don't have to go in and wait for people to get out. So bottom line is, you can't go to the bathroom until they get done. So they've locked up the whole thing. That's not a good way to run a database. Not a good way to run janitors either. But anyway, idea being is that in the transaction, I'm going to get my locks. And if I can't get the locks, he's going to roll back. I have a way of specifying how long I'm willing to wait for that lock. So I'm willing to wait 5 milliseconds, or I'm willing to wait 100 milliseconds, because these locks aren't going to last very long. I'm just going to bing, 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 and I need to get out of there, right?
So what unlocks when you
Either roll back or commit.
okay.
So I lock the row. I do the insert, I do the update. Those guys better happen really quickly together. We don't want to sit there. We don't want to lock a whole table and sometimes just locking one row, right? Lock row 0 and insert, do my insert. I'm not worried about, I don't have to lock anything to insert, right? That'll take care of itself. Update so then I update my statistics. If anything went wrong here, I roll back the transaction. If I get through it, I commit the transaction. Okay. Now, run the code after each step, check, make sure it's all working. And again, this is for some people are bad about this. Don't type for 2 hours and then try to run it. Run it, run it, run it. Make sure it's working at this point. Yeah, and then you'll have to back up a few times, but that's, that happens. Always check and make sure that this is running. And so after I run this, I should see, what am I seeing here? I'm seeing 17,576 players have 0 games, I believe. Don't start the games until get that working. Check it and see. Look at RPS players. Do you see zeros in the P game count? You should see all zeros there. Okay. Now the fun begins. Insert trigger. This also goes in the try block after the insert of the trigger. You don't have to rewrite the whole silly trigger. Right? This goes, you put this code into the try block. You have 2 players, they're both handled the same way. This is inserting into games. I'm only going to cover one of them. The P1 ID. Okay, I know what P1 ID is. Go out to the players table and get the game count for that player. From players into a variable. I'm calling my variable at I. You call it anything you want. Call it as you please. Update RPS players. Increment the game count where the PID is equal to the P1 ID in my trigger. Now, you're going to have to be able to update that table. If you have an update trigger that's blocking it, it'll block it. So that means you got to just go get rid of that update trigger. on players. You have to be able to update players. And a trigger blocking updates will block everybody. Now I've updated it, so as I am choosing to write it, I has the old game count, what it used to be. It's been updated now. So if the player had was involved in 3 games before, now the game count is 4, but the local variable is still 3. You could write it either way. You could you could increment the local variable and then take care of it later or something. There's lots of ways you could do it. I just decided I was going to update RPS players and just leave the I alone. So I know what it is now. I know what it was a minute ago. I know what it was a minute ago. It's what it is now minus 1. Now, take care of the statistics table. Here's where life gets a little bit tricky. Our player has moved to a different bucket. I'm calling these buckets. So how many players have 3? Well, how many players do I have in the 3-game bucket, the 4-game bucket, the 5-game bucket, and so on? That's what I'm calling them. Term bucket comes from hashing. You'll hear it again if you take advanced programming. So if the player had 4 games, he or she now has 5, he's moved to a new bucket. Okay, here's where I have to ask the question, do we have such a bucket? This is why I put the 0, 0 in, so I didn't have to ask that every time I put in a player. I have to put in some players before it makes any sense to have a game. So I may as well not have to ask this question. Do I have a bucket? So he's moved from the 4 bucket to the 5. Do I have a 5 bucket? Right? If it exists, do I have that? If it exists, where the number of games is I plus 1. I could also have taken that from the players table, but it's just, that's why I left it. I left the old one in I. So if I was 4, I want to check to see if 5 exists. Is he there? It matters when you look at the counter. Then we're fine. It ever exists. Most of the time it will. Else, I have to insert that row. That's okay. Just insert the row. I don't want to have to ask that every time I put in a 0 player. I just put him in there. I don't have to ask this question when I insert a new player. If I didn't have the 5 bucket, I do now. It has 1 player. Next player, won't worry about him. And one more thing I have to do, I've promoted that player and I have to decrement the count of the old bucket. It's okay if it's 0. It's okay if it just had 1 player in it and that player went up from, I had 1 player in the 4 bucket, that player moved to the 5 bucket, the 4 bucket just goes to 0. It doesn't bother me a bit. Think about how much fun it would be to delete and keep this up to date. It wouldn't be difficult. I mean, okay. Depending on your style, it's about 25 or 30 lines of code, depending on, I personally like my code kind of spread out a little bit. I don't like code. When I change from one idea to another, I'll always skip a blank line. When I change from checking something to inserting something, there'll always be a blank line in there. And so, now you do it again for player 2, do the same thing, just change the name. And the output, when I select from RPS statistics, should be the same thing that I get when I select from the RPS statistics view. That's my test on it. Is it working? Let's find out. Statistics. Where am I? Where am I? Who am I? Okay, let's look at the RPS statistics view. Execute. Order by what was that game count, I believe, wasn't it? What did I call mine? Okay, what did I call it? Num games? Yeah, num games. Copy that. Oh, okay. Paste. Execute. Now, and this will vary every time you run it. There'll be different numbers. You see that nice normal distribution happening with everything except 0. If I ran it longer, the 0 would tend to shrink, because remember, I've created all my games, and now I'm creating I've created all my players, and now I create, so I won't, I'll get fewer and fewer with 0 games. If I were to keep creating them, I'd see a nice normal distribution here. But they should have a bit more with 1 than with 2, than with 3, than 4, 5, and 6. And I should see that, what is that, 1 over e to the negative x squared or something like that. Oh. e to the negative x squared, that bell curve. So I'm going to see half of a bell curve. I'm expecting. And of course, I'd be real surprised if I hadn't gotten that. You shouldn't see anything weird here. But the thing of it is, this is the view. Now I can do show plan, and I can look at how long it takes it to do that view. So I can turn on my show plan, and I'm going to see that it takes it about over a second to get that view. Doesn't show me that, but if I turn on show plan and do the view, I'm going to see it's expensive. On the other hand, when I select from the table, I should see the same thing, 322, 100, 354. That'll be enough to test it. Now, if I do this, I should get, okay, why am I not getting anything? Probably because I haven't put in that trigger yet. What I get for sitting here chatting and not getting ready to go. Let's see, where is my trigger? I gave you this. I gave you this one. This one? No. Oh, I haven't run my triggers. Yeah, got to run my triggers. Now, how long is it to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds, 4 seconds, 7 seconds, 8 seconds? Definitely increases the time when I have the trigger in there. Now I have 4 players with 7 games and 4 players with 7 games, 20 players with 6 games, 90 players with 5 games, and so on. Up there.
That was from the view, right? You're just
Yeah, that's the view. Select from statistics view. Now, if I'm having a good day, and if my code is working, when I turn around and I execute from RPS statistics, this is from the table, right? These, I don't know, it's not supposed to be an invalid. They're not the same. Okay, well, something's wrong here. Mine aren't coming out the same, but then I have been kind of trashing it here. They are supposed to be the same, and I'll figure out, well, they were the same earlier, but I was grading and I've trashed my whole database. So when I put them back there and get that trigger working again, they will be. So don't be surprised if yours don't either the first time. But the idea is that instead of counting them, instead of getting everything together, and then every time I want to see it, I go in and I count everything. Versus that, I'm going to keep the counts up to date in a table. And I'll figure out what the problem is. I don't want to put my my actual triggers up there. Basically, that logic does work, and I probably just are getting an overflow someplace. I like you, I have several versions of it laying around. Okay. Other questions? Okay. It's almost 7 o'clock. I'm going to wrap up tonight, and we're going to move to lab. So I'll be here. I'm not saying wrap up. That means leave. I'm saying I'm going to turn off my recording. But I might, if I find anything I need to say, I'll go back and say it on the recording. Anything else? Okay, I'm going to turn off the recorder right now.